As President of the Fire Brigade Union, I wanted to begin this update by thanking members for taking the time to engage with this important discussion. Pay matters. It matters every year because it affects every member, every family and every workplace across our union. That's why pay remains one of the most important responsibilities entrusted to the National Joint Council, the Executive Council and our negotiators. Over the coming weeks, there will be discussions in branches, brigade committees and workplaces across the UK. That's exactly how it should be. Our union is strongest when members are informed, when their views are shared openly and respectfully, and when decisions are made collectively. We won't all approach these discussions from the same perspective, but we are united by a common commitment to securing the best possible outcome for firefighters, control staff and all of our members. I also want to acknowledge the considerable work that has gone into reaching this point. Since the start of the year's negotiations, the Executive Council has devoted significant time to discussing pay, considering the options available to the union and scrutinising the progress of negotiations. Alongside that, our General Secretary, Assistant General Secretary and the negotiating team have spent many months engaged in detailed discussions with the employers to secure the best offer possible in the current circumstances. Today is about ensuring members have the information that they need before making that decision. You'll hear first from our General Secretary, who will provide an overview of the 2026 pay offer and how it was negotiated and why the Executive Council has reached its recommendation. You'll then hear from our Assistant General Secretary, who will provide an update on the separate but equally important work taking place on pay reform and the progress being made towards a new national pay structure. Whatever your initial view of the offer, I would encourage every member to engage with the discussions ahead, attend meetings, ask questions and most importantly, take part in the ballot. Thank you. I'll now hand over to General Secretary. Steve.
Well, thanks, President, and I will provide a short update on the 2026 pay offer, but I'll also explain how we've reached this point and set out what happens next. So last week at the National Joint Council, the fire service employers made a formal pay offer to the Fire Brigades Union. The offer is for a 3.8% increase on all basic pay rates and on CPD, effective from the 1st of July 2026. If accepted by our members, this would increase the salary of a competent whole-time firefighter to £40,358 per year. It would also increase the retaining fee for retained members, control salaries and all other grey book rates accordingly, including CPD with an increase of 3.8%. Importantly, there are no strings attached to this offer. There are no changes to terms and conditions linked to it. But look, members will rightly want to look at this offer in the context of inflation and also in the context of the wider economy that we sit in right now. So the latest inflation figures show CPI at 2.8% and CPIH at 3%. And while forecast suggests inflation could rise again this year, it is expected to ease across the whole year of this pay deal. And we have experienced a period of considerable economic uncertainty over recent years, but more so in recent months, where inflation has moved rapidly and where the cost of living has placed real pressure on our members, firefighters working in stations, control rooms, headquarters and all across the UK Fire and Rescue Service, having an impact on our families. The reality is, though, that pay negotiations are never conducted with the benefit of hindsight. We are negotiating now for a pay award that will apply over the coming year. So using economic information that is constantly changing is difficult. That is why we have taken our time since February when we entered into those negotiations to monitor developments carefully before reaching a negotiated position ahead of the annual July pay award. So against that backdrop, the Executive Council considered this offer very carefully, had a lot of debate as you'd imagine, discussion and reflection on where we are with pay for this year. And nobody within the union is suggesting that one pay award can undo the damage caused by years of austerity, public sector pay restraint over many years and the long-term erosion of firefighters' pay. But we know the losses suffered over many years cannot simply be recovered overnight. However, though, it is important to recognise the progress that has been made. If this offer is accepted, firefighters will have secured pay increases totalling 24% since 2021, following the 7% award in 22, 5% in 23, 4% in 2024, 3.2% for 2025, and now the proposed 3.8% for 2026. That's an increase almost of £10,000 in those 5 years. but also alongside that, achieving long-standing items relating to pay, such as the trainee rate of pay being scrapped last year, the retaining fee increase a couple of years ago, and progress on maternity pay as well. So while members will rightly form their own view about how far that goes in addressing historic losses, it does represent a significant improvement compared with the years of pay restraint that characterised much of the previous decade that our members have suffered. So the offer itself is the result of months of negotiations by myself and the AGS reporting back to the Executive. And since February, the Executive Council has been discussing pay in detail, considering the options available to the union, making sure regional committees, brigade committees and branches and officials of our union are engaged in discussions about both the annual pay settlement but also the wider question of pay reform. The employers improved their position during those negotiations, I'll be clear about that. But having assessed the situation carefully, the union's negotiators, myself and the AGS, believe that this is the best offer that can be secured through negotiation alone. So of course, members will make their own decision. Quite rightly, that is how our union operates now and always will. But the Executive Council's view is that this represents a fair offer in the current circumstances, both economically, where inflation currently is, but also one that should be considered alongside the wider work being undertaken to reform the national pay structure. And the AGS will cover a bit more about that shortly. But that brings me to what remains the union's number one industrial priority of pay reform. And Conference 2025 made pay reform central focus of our industrial strategy moving forward. And Conference 2026 just last month reaffirmed that position. Because we've been clear for more than 20 years, firefighters, control firefighters have worked within a pay structure that offers very limited opportunities for progression. Because once a firefighter becomes competent, their peak level of pay has been reached. In many cases, it's the only route to a substantial increase in earnings has been through promotion. And the union has consistently argued that this is no longer reflective of a modern day fire and rescue service, reflective of the increasing complexity of the role, all the professional skills our members develop throughout their careers. So over the last year, the Fire Brigades Union, employers and government have been engaged in sustained discussions about creating a new pay structure that provides fairer progression opportunities and better recognises the skills and competence and also professional development of our members. But there is still a great deal of work to do on that. We've been clear about that. No final agreement has been reached, and many more important details remain subject to negotiation and reporting back to the Executive. However, I will say this, there is a genuine engagement on issues that the union, our members, have been raising for many years, and the Executive Council remains committed to seeing that work through. As I said, in a moment, the Assistant General Secretary will provide a more detailed update on the progress that has been made in those pay reform discussions, the issues currently under consideration, but also, importantly, the next steps in that process. So for now, the immediate question, and quite rightly so, is about the 2026 pay offer. The Executive Council is recommending acceptance of the offer. But over the coming weeks, Brigade officials will organise meetings to discuss the offer in more detail. They will be on hand to answer questions and hear members' views. And following those meetings, members will participate in an electronic consultative ballot and will rightly have the final say on whether the offer is accepted. So as always, we will continue to keep our members informed throughout the process. And I'd just like to finish with this, President, and say thank you for those taking time to watch, involving themselves in the process. And please make sure you do engage with your local meetings, ask questions, but most importantly, as the President has said, take part in the ballot.
Thanks for that, Steve. We'll now hear from the Assistant General Secretary, Ben.
Thank you, Ian. When we accepted the pay offer last year, we knew we had a generational task to seize the opportunity of pay reform. Conferences in 2025 and this year again in 2026 reaffirmed the focus of delivering a fair, modern and professional progressive pay structure. Since July 2025, this work has remained the number one industrial priority. A huge amount of progress has been achieved. However, like the last time we moved from one pay structure to another, it will take time to get it right. Back then it took 5 years. This time round we want it to be much quicker than that. But unlike the last time, we want to be part of it and not have a pay structure imposed upon us. We do not want to see quick solutions that only serve the employers. We want to see long-term solutions to age-old problems. Your Executive Council have been monitoring the progress made on pay reform. At each and every business meeting that they've had, they have held me and the General Secretary to account. And at each and every juncture, they've collectively agreed positive progress is being made. We've seen the misrepresentations online about what pay reform is, so it's important we're clear what it's all about. The single biggest task of what pay reform is to clarify what the role of the fire service is and what the role of a firefighter is, and in return see the much needed investment into our industry. Let me be absolutely clear. If we want to end a decade of arguments about what's in and what's out the role of a firefighter, we must see pay reform to its conclusion. The current role maps do not reflect the work firefighters do. Everyone recognises that, and therefore we need to work with the government and with the national employers to deliver the necessary investment to pay firefighters for what they already largely do. Another area of pay reform the FBU is focused on is ending the inequalities that exist within the current pay structure, specifically CPD and control pay. These inequalities can't be addressed with a sticking plaster or a bit of tinkering around the edges. They require a reformation of the pay structure to ensure we no longer have those disparities in a postcode lottery for pay. It is true that for the first time in almost 2 decades, the FBU, the national employers, and this time the government are all working in step, aspiring to deliver a pay structure that addresses those inequalities, rewards competence and experiences, recognises skills and provides genuine career progression. President, I'll finish with this point. If we want already professional firefighters to be paid a professional salary much higher than today's, then we must complete our strategy on pay reform, which we began almost a year ago. This is no doubt challenging work, but work worth doing. I really urge members not to gamble this away by rejecting this year's pay offer the General Secretary has outlined. He and I know that pay reform is the opportunity we must get a hold of, and I thank you now for listening. Solidarity.
Right, thanks for that, Ben. I'd like to thank both the General Secretary and the Assistant General Secretary for their updates, and I hope members have found them helpful and informative. As you've heard today, there are really 2 important issues before us. The first is the 2026 pay offer, which members will shortly have the opportunity to consider and vote on. The second is a continuing work on pay reform, which Conference has identified as the union's #1 industrial priority, and which has the potential to shape the future of pay progression within the Fire and Rescue Service for many years to come. Neither of these issues should be considered lightly. Pay negotiations are never straightforward. They take place against a backdrop of economic uncertainty, pressures on public finances and the wider political environment. At the same time, we all know the impact that years of austerity, pay restraint and rising living costs have had on our members. That's why it's important that every member takes the time to consider the information that has been provided, attends the local meetings where possible, and ask questions and engage in the discussion. As a democratic union, the final decision rests with the membership. The Executive Council has reached a recommendation, but ultimately it's members who will determine the outcome through the consultative ballot. Whatever view members take, it is important that we approach these discussions in the spirit that has always made our union strong: informed debate, mutual respect and collective decision making. Members should understand that if the 3.8 offer is rejected, then such a development would inevitably change the current landscape of our negotiations. Rejection of the offer would likely require the union to begin preparations for a potential industrial action campaign in pursuit of an improved settlement. While that, of course, of action would ultimately be determined by members, it could place at risk, delay or significantly disrupt the progress that has been made on pay reform and the wider discussions currently underway. The challenges facing firefighters and emergency control staff do not disappear once the ballot concludes. The work to improve pay, secure meaningful pay, reform, defend conditions and campaign for a proper investment in our fire and rescue service will continue. The work requires a united, organised and engaged membership. On behalf of the Executive Council, thank you for taking time to watch this update and for everything you do every day in the workplaces and in the community. Please take part in the meetings, make your voice heard and most importantly make sure you cast your vote when the ballot opens. Thank you and stay safe.